Unless we change our ways, I don't see our soft power coming back. Of course, we are always going to be a major country, maybe not the global hegemon. We are losing that role. And I fear that our loss of prestige, influence, and power could be precipitous if the dollar goes down.
Welcome to the Diplomacy Podcast, where we explore how diplomacy shapes our world and our lives. Today we're talking about the future of American power. I'm joined by Ambassador Chas Freeman. He served as US Ambassador to Saudi Arabia, Deputy Chief of Mission in China and Thailand, and Assistant Secretary of Defense for International Security Affairs. Ambassador, welcome. Let me start by sharing an experience I had when I was a child. And the experience dates back to 1989, 1991, probably the peak of American power. I remember that it was a time, particularly in Europe where I was, when it seemed that the United States could just do no wrong. To what do you attribute the success the United States achieved both in soft and hard power that led to the height in the early 90s?
We kept our word. We stood by our allies, although, to be fair, the word ally is a bit of a stretch. We basically protect other countries. Their contributions to our security are not great, but we kept our word. We demonstrated in the Gulf War that we had overcome Vietnam syndrome, that we had a very competent military. From the perspective of other people, whatever we may have felt about our own economy, we were prosperous. We were democratic. No one questioned that the Bill of Rights was still operating in the United States. The constitutional separation of powers was in effect. Of course, now we have a situation in which we're undergoing a constitutional collapse. The republic that we formed in 1787, with the Constitutional Convention at which Benjamin Franklin warned we might not be able to keep the republic, in fact, is in jeopardy. And that has had a huge impact on our image abroad, our soft power, which has been aggravated by the end of diplomacy and its replacement by either military operations or bullying, outright bullying. With regard to economic power, I would say there's a big problem. People imagine that you can use it coercively. Our current president believes that. But when he puts a 50% tariff on coffee from Brazil, that is not a hit at Brazil. That is a strike at American breakfast. Americans having breakfast, who will now pay more. The Brazilians won't pay anything. They'll just send their coffee elsewhere. We need to relearn both diplomatic vocabulary and the essence of statecraft. We had a period during the Cold War when George Kennan had supplied us with a grand strategy of containment, and we didn't need to think about strategy. And I think our ability to do so seriously atrophied.
Don't you think we had a golden age of American diplomacy? Was there such a time?
I think probably in the immediate aftermath of World War II, when we formed NATO, we developed various responses to the post-war situation. So I think that was the high point, really. We made various commitments coming out of World War II. We created institutions that have lasted. They're now being supplemented by Chinese-originated institutions because we have basically blocked reform, or in the case of the World Trade Organization, actually conducted sabotage. But that was a very creative period. So Dean Acheson wrote a book called Present with the Creation. I think we could write a book now, Present at the Demolition, because that is what is happening. That order that we created is being demolished, not by anyone else, but by us.
The US Foreign Service was fairly young at that time, right? It was founded in 1924. You're talking about the 1950s, essentially, the late 40s, in the 50s. So what do you attribute this success, given that we didn't have that many seasoned professionals in diplomacy?
First of all, we had imported, largely from Germany, Hans Morgenthau and others, a series of doctrines of foreign policy. We had the advantage of tutelage by the British, who have an illustrious history. We had people who were international minded. We'd just gone through a war and been reminded of the consequences of not structuring things correctly. And we were very fortunate with the quality of the people that we had at that time. It's really striking the contrast between the extent to which we rose to the occasion, adjusted our thinking, created new institutions, created a new world order, and our failure to do that after the end of the Cold War. I mean, it's very striking. The Cold War had diplomats acting as much as imperial administrators as they were acting as diplomats. That is to say, it's very easy to persuade a foreigner to do something if you hold all the cards. Soft power does predispose others to follow your lead. It inculcates trust. And we had that for much of the Cold War. Not everywhere, but much of it. And even our adversaries admired our diplomacy. I know I was involved in the opening to China, intimately involved in it virtually at every stage. And I know that the Chinese deliberately remodeled their foreign service on ours. I think they've improved the model, but that is another issue.
So for the height of soft power that the United States had in the early 90s, where does the credit go? How much of it goes to the farsightedness or the skills of American political leaders and diplomats, and how much was it just luck?
Well, I think it was a combination of both, but I wouldn't discount the skill. No, of course, I would argue that less skill is required if you're very powerful, and we were very powerful. So we did negotiations sometimes which are quite unseemly. But for the most part, Americans, at least the generation I grew up in, were deferential to foreigners. We did not, we tried to be tactful. I think there is a big difference here, which I observed in the course of my career on several occasions between courtiers, that is, securocrats, people who hang around in Washington and don't experience diplomacy abroad, where you have to persuade someone to do what you want them to do, and you can't direct them as you would as a bureaucrat in Washington.
Could you specifically talk about the reaction to 9/11 and the dynamic with Colin Powell, the Secretary of State, the other players at the time, and what many refer to as the militarization of American foreign policy in the response to 9/11?
Well, I would not blame Colin Powell for that. He was, in fact, excluded from any real role in policy by George W. Bush and Rumsfeld at the Pentagon. But I do think this was a period in which, after 9/11, in which various things happened that gave us a bad name. For one thing, we went on a rampage with the global war on terrorism. Terrorism is a practice, a political technique. It is not something you can defeat in a war. But at the moment, we are involved in combat in 82 different countries against alleged terrorists. And we also, in the course of this, violated all of the values we had tried to exemplify earlier. We engaged in a kidnapping. We engaged in torture. We bombed indiscriminately. We created kill chains that wiped out weddings in Afghanistan and so forth and so on. We developed a severe case of Islamophobia when there are 2 billion people in the world who profess Islam and can't help be put off by that. And our politics, we destroyed some of the key institutions that we had that supported our soft power. For example, the U.S. Information Agency. We euthanized it. And we also lost over the course of the 5 or 6 decades of the Cold War and its immediate aftermath, we lost our eyes and ears abroad in the field of journalism. We just don't have any real appreciation of what's happening abroad. We're in denial, and that, of course, was a major element of the reaction to 9/11. Nobody ever asked, why did this happen? We just conveniently said they did it because they hate us. Well, that is absolute nonsense. We were attacked as a reprisal for what we were doing in Palestine and elsewhere. And it was very clear, if you actually read the statements of Al-Qaeda or those associated with it, that was the case. But we were told, no, this has nothing to do with Palestine. It's just that, Muslims hate Americans. You can't, this gets to another point. You can't have a foreign policy that runs off inhaling your own propaganda or respecting your own denial or believing what is in what the government line is that is written down by scribes posing as journalists. So we now have a president who doesn't apparently like intelligence briefings, but watches Fox News. So that's how he gets his knowledge of the world. I will leave it there. This is not conducive to diplomacy. You can see this in the abortive negotiations with Russia over Ukraine. We have, first of all, there's no professional involved. Stephen Witkoff goes in to meet Vladimir Putin unaccompanied. There's no record of the conversation, as far as I can tell, except on the Russian side. There's no American interpreter, so whatever nuances are intended may not be conveyed. Meanwhile, General Kellogg is in Kyiv saying something entirely different, and Donald Trump is saying something different than both of these men, neither of whom has any experience with either Russians or Ukrainians or in diplomacy.
So from that height of US power, in this case soft power, it seems it was all downhill. How much of that soft power do you think the United States still had at the beginning of this administration?
I think we still had some soft power, some appeal in Europe among NATO members. But the Gaza genocide had cost us the sympathy of the entire world. We are retreating from Europe for various reasons, accusing the Europeans of various sins that we ourselves are committing in terms of support for democracy and so forth. I mean, it's very odd to have the vice president on the one hand talk about the need to annul the Romanian elections, and on the other hand argue that Europeans are interfering in politics and should allow the Alternative für Deutschland to have a full say in German politics. So we're full of contradictions, and we're not very persuasive. We're peremptory, we're demanding, we have limited patience, we're petulant. These are not qualities that reassure people or build soft power.
Where do you see the future of American power, and is there any possibility that American soft power ever comes back?
Well, that depends on whether we halt the trend domestically toward autocracy. If we have elections in 2028, which the Constitution demands, will they be fair? Will they be open? Will they produce an adjustment? Will we learn a lesson from having alienated the world? It's really something when we have both our very friendly neighbors, historically Canada and Mexico, going in separate directions from us, and polls showing that they see us as the principal threat to their national identity and integrity. What about Greenland? What about the Panama Canal? We are behaving in exactly the way we accuse Vladimir Putin of behaving. So unless we change our ways, I don't see our soft power coming back. Of course, we are always going to be a major country, maybe not the global hegemon or enjoy global primacy as we've done. We are a nation of almost 350 million people. We have an abundance of water and arable land. We have a distinguished intellectual and industrial tradition. We're protected from Europe by the Atlantic Ocean and Asia by the Pacific. But we're going to be a major country among other major countries. There isn't going to be a global hegemon. We are losing that role. And I fear that our loss of prestige, influence, and power could be precipitous if the dollar goes down. We are piling up debt as though it made no difference. We are losing the credibility of investors. People on the private sector don't want to invest in our country, because they're not sure what the policies are going to be or whether the rule of law still exists to protect them. Governments don't want to be involved with treasuries because they increasingly see no way that we can handle our debt. And we are running a huge deficit every year just to keep the government going as it is. So in effect, we are traveling a road to bankruptcy. Doesn't seem to bother the current administration, but it's not impressive to people who are trying to seek value in a reserve currency or a safe haven for their wealth. And this problem is compounded by the destruction of the fiduciary responsibility for reserves. So we confiscate Venezuelan gold and Russian dollars, and we propose to spend them against those governments. You can't be a banker if you steal your customers' money, whatever good reason you may have for doing so. So we're digging a hole, and we're digging deeper, not stopping.
Do you think that by trying to exercise power through the tariffs and other demands and what some would call bullying, this administration is in fact eroding American power?
Of course. What we have left is military power. And even there, it's not clear that we have the margin that we once did. Many people believe that, the predictions are, if we get into a war over the political status of Taiwan, both we and the Chinese will lose 2/3 of our Air Force and Navy. That will end us as a global power. People need to think about that. Also, the Chinese have the ability to build ships and replace aircraft at a rate that we can't. Their shipbuilding industry is 200 times the size of ours. There are perils out there that we're not managing, which have the capacity to radically alter our status in the world.
Why do you think it's so difficult for politicians in any country, really, from my experience, to understand what diplomacy can do to help implement their own policies?
Well, I think they have in our case, of course, we have a very powerful military. So the answer to every question is it's coercive. Let's start with sanctions. And if they don't bring the foreign party to heel, send in the Marines or bomb them. So where are the diplomats? Well, they're used as the cleanup squad. After you've finished pulverizing another country, you bring them in to try to reconcile people in the country to the new occupation that you've just begun. I'm describing Iraq. This is no way to operate. Diplomacy should be a preventive, should be a prophylactic system rather than a repair job on something that the military have destroyed. The basic problem with the United States is, of course, that we have not had the experience of European countries. We've not been invaded. If you're French, you know that if you fire artillery over in the direction of Germany, the Germans are going to come after you. And the same thing with the Italians. And, the Germans know that if they get into a war, it can be very painful. Yes, they had a short victorious war in the Franco-Prussian War, which united Germany due to the cleverness of Bismarck. But they also had World War I and World War II, which were horrifying. And they were divided during the Cold War. The Germans have been very contrite about the sins of their forefathers, precisely because they were in a position to say, that wasn't us. That was a bunch of louts who came in and took over the country. Japan has not been sincere in contrition because it's a Confucian society, and you can't accuse your grandfather of being a war criminal. And the leadership then are the grandparents and great-grandparents of the current leadership. So that's why Japan doesn't bring off a successful apology. But the fact that everyone is now hedging, President Trump celebrates a commitment, sort of a commitment, not real commitment, by many European countries to go to 5% of GDP in defense spending, 3.5% plus another 1.5% in phony money, I think. But anyway, he doesn't seem to realize this is hedging against us as well as against the Russians. It's acquiring an independent defense capability that is no longer dependent on the United States. That will reduce American influence and the ability to direct policies of European countries. Maybe that's a good thing. But it isn't, I think, what Mr. Trump and others intend.
Because ultimately, effective diplomacy only contributes to American power, correct?
Yes, it's not a substitute for the American economy, for an American image of political stability, for a wise statecraft, for a powerful military. It is the instrument by which you use those various strengths to achieve the agreement of foreign countries to your preferred set of policies and objectives. It is an art of seduction, not rape. But at the moment, we're pretty close to bullying people in a manner that resembles rape.
And given the state of the world, I think it's obvious that we need more diplomacy, but I don't see any respect or appreciation of it.
I'm not sure people understand, those in power, to go back to your original question. They understand what diplomacy is. It's not taught. We don't teach statecraft diplomacy in our educational system. Diplomats are inherently marginal people with one foot in one culture and another in yet another culture. We are intermediaries and therefore suspected by both sides of favoring the other. When we get into explaining what foreign countries are thinking and how we must attempt to persuade them to think otherwise, we look like apologists to politicians who are very sure of, they are responsive to domestic opinion and their own career interests or special interests. You agree to talk, that doesn't mean you're going to agree with the other side. And in fact, agreement is not the object of diplomacy. The object of diplomacy is to advance the interests in your charge, to serve your national interest, to convince the other side that their national interest would be served by serving yours.
is the conclusion that if we've lost any or a lot of American power, we did it to ourselves in the end.
Yes, this is self-sabotage. And it represents a sort of troglodyte anti-expertise sentiment, which we see in general in the country, a leveling instinct. Why do we need weather reports? Why do we need an education department? Why do we need a Russian expert? There's no Russian expert in the White House now, by the way. No one at the NSC with that expertise. Why do we cut the people working on China at the State Department at the moment when we declare China as our prime adversary? What does this make sense? No, it doesn't. It's a kind of arbitrary and capricious downsizing of the government, and it represents an ideology which says we don't like big government unless it's wearing a uniform. If it's wearing a uniform, we love it, and we celebrate it at football games and everywhere else. But if it's not wearing a uniform, we don't like it. And so it's self-sabotage. Nobody in Russia or China or anywhere did any of these. They didn't decide to export U.S. jobs, to outsource them. The American companies did that. They didn't decide to pile up American debt. We decided that. They didn't decide to go to war, invading all sorts of people on flimsy pretexts or false premises, as we did with Iraq. They didn't decide to hang on in Afghanistan rather than accomplishing a purpose and not moving the goalposts, which we constantly did. This was a product of our own political process. So if we're going to get back the soft power or the self-respect that I hope we will, it's going to have to come from reform and opening here, not from opposing someone else. The problem with the American Foreign Service now in particular is a simple one. Why enter a career where the top ranks are reserved for used car salesmen and cronies of the president who do real estate deals in New York? What sort of career is that? If you ran the military that way and you said, well, you can go out and die on the battlefield. You can suffer the indignities and you can take the risks that are involved in service in difficult conditions. But we're going to have you directed by some Kentucky colonel who's a political crony of the president. So don't aspire to become any kind of flag officer. You won't be one. We have the White House selects ambassadors purely on political grounds. And in fact, now there are loyalty tests going on. And I thought when I entered the Foreign Service in 1965, there was still the stench of that from the McCarthy era to be detected. I thought that was bad, but we've got a worse situation now. So why would anyone want to join the Foreign Service? Some do. More power to them. They want to serve the country. I hope they get the chance to do so. I hope we straighten out and fly right.
Well, thank you, Ambassador, very much. I appreciate you coming on. Thank you for joining us. And remember, diplomacy is the world's best hope. See you next time.